call the roll.
Adams, Amiano, Anderson, Arambula, Bell, Bill Berryhill, Tom Berryhill, Blakesley, Block, Blumenfield, Bradford, Brownlee, Buchanan, Caballero, Calderon, Carter, Chesbro, Conway, Cook, Cotto, Davis, De La Torre, De Leon, DeVore, Emerson, Ing, Evans, Fuhr, Fletcher, Fong, Fuentes, Fuller, Furutani, Gaines, Galgiani, Garrick, Gilmore, Hagman, Hall, Harkey, Hayashi, Hernandez, Hill, Huber, Huffman, Jeffries, Jones, Knight, Liu, Logue, Lowenthal, Ma, Mendoza, Miller, Monning, Nava, Nestande, Nilo, Nilsson, Norby, John A. Perez, V. Manuel Perez, Portantino, Ruskin, Salas, Saldana, Silva, Skinner, Smythe, Solorio, Strickland, Swanson, Torlixon, Torres, Tarico, Tran, Valines, Yamada. Madam Speaker.
We're going to pray. Members, we ask our guests and visitors in the gallery and in the rear of the chambers to please stand. Father Papadamos is present and will be offering today's prayer. Father Papadamos.
Good morning. Lord, Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas wrote in one of the court's decisions that we are a religious people and our institutions presuppose a supreme being. The Supreme Court also begins each day with a proclamation, God save the United States and this honorable court. Lord, we exist as a free society because of the freedoms we enjoy based on the rights you give each of us as persons. We thank you for these rights, and we ask that you save us all this day and forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We ask our guests and visitors in the gallery and the rear of the chambers to remain standing. We will have the flag salute led by the Honorable Bob Bloomingfield. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Father. Thank you. We'll have the reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Wednesday, February 3rd, 2010. The Assembly met at 11 a.m. Honorable Isidore
Mr. Rico moves. Mr. Blakely second that the reading of the previous day's journal will be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference to bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read. Amendments deemed adopted. Message from the governors, there are none. Message from the Senate, there are none. Motions and resolutions. We'll move to Mrs. Small. Ms. Small, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to allow Assembly members Evans, Fletcher, Salas, and Saldana to speak on an adjourned in memory today.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to re-refer ACR 74, Portantino, from the Business and Professions Committee to the Rules Committee pursuant to Assembly Rule 96.
Without objection. Members, we will recess the regular session for the purpose of convening the 8th extraordinary session. Without objection, we will substitute the prayer pledge and other opening procedures in the regular session for those items in the 8th extraordinary session. We'll move to motions and resolutions. Okay. Ms. Evans. Members. Members. Hold on. Members. Thank you. Ms. Evans, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lot of energy on the floor this morning. Members, I'm presenting AB 8X1. This is a budget
Ms.
vehicle.
Evans, we'll have the clerk read, then you may begin.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.
Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ms. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought there was something missing there. This bill is a budget vehicle that will be used to implement the Proposition 58 special session policy changes. This action today is simply a procedural vote to send this bill, as well as the 19 subsequent bills, to the Senate so that these bills are available for expedited action in the special session. Traditionally, the Democrats vote aye and the Republicans stay off at this stage of the procedure. And after the vote on this bill, I will request that the vote on this bill be substituted for the vote on the following 19 bills. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Any question or debate? Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, we will confirm with that. We're going to ask the Republicans to lay off this vote and go ahead and unanimous consent to substitute the roll on the next votes afterward.
Clerk will open the roll. All those voters desire to vote. All those voters desire to vote. All those vote who desire to vote. All those voters 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 desire to vote. All those voters, clerk, close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 43, noes 0. Measure passes. Mr. Tirico, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, hereby request unanimous consent to substitute the previous vote for items 2 through 20.
Without objection, we'll read each item and substitute the vote. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 2 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 3 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 4 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 5 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 6 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 7 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 8 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 9 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 10 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 11 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 12 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 13 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 14 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 15 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 16 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 17 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 18 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
Assembly Bill 19 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0.
And Assembly Bill 20 by the Assembly Committee on Budget and Act relating to the Budget Act of 2009.
Ayes 43, no 0. Members, we will recess the 8th extraordinary session. Upon call of the Speaker, we're back in regular session. Members, we'll move to guest introductions. I believe Member Connie Conway will pass. Very well. Will pass. Members, there will not be floor session tomorrow, February the 5th, nor will there be check-in session tomorrow. We'll move to adjourn in memories. One moment. Members, floor session will be Monday, February 8th, 12 noon. There's no floor session, no check-in session tomorrow, February the 5th. However, floor session will begin February 8th, 12 noon. We'll move to adjourn in memories. We'll move to Mrs. Evans. Members, we're moving to adjourn in memories. Thank you. Ms. Evans, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with great sadness that I acknowledge Laverne Wetch of Santa Rosa, one of my constituents who passed away on Saturday, January 30th. Mrs. Wetch is survived by her husband of 53 years, Phil Wetch, and her 5 children, one of whom is well known to members on this floor, Scott Wetch of Sacramento. She's also survived by 7 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. She was born Laverne Gleason in Bodega, California, and her family was one of the pioneer ranching families which settled the Sonoma Coast in the mid-1850s. Mrs. Wetch was a lifelong Sonoma County resident, and she was active in many civic organizations and worked in the county elections office for over a decade. Mrs. Wetch will be very, very sorely missed by all of us in our community, and I ask that we adjourn in her memory.
Ms. Salas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This morning I arise with a great deal of sadness to adjourn in the memory of a dear friend of mine, but more importantly, a man that was a hero in the veterans community, not only in the county of San Diego, but throughout the state of California. John Smith was born in 1948, and he enlisted in the Army in 1966, the year that I graduated from high school and the year that he graduated from high school. And he enlisted in the Army, where he was a medic. I have no doubt that John's experiences fighting in Vietnam and some of the bloodiest battles really shaped the way that he devoted his life when he came back into civilian society to make sure that no veteran was ever left behind, just as he never left any veteran behind on the battlefield. John saw so much in battle. As a very young man, in his 18, 19, 20 years old, he was the person that was seeing the soldiers say their last words. He was the one that saw the soldiers in the moments of most hurt to them and helped them pass through trying times. John himself was wounded at Vietnam. He received 4 serious wounds, and he received a Purple Heart, multiple Purple Hearts for his wounds. It took him a long time to recuperate from those wounds. After he got out of the hospital, he enrolled in college where he received a degree in psychology and graduated magna cum laude. He was one of the original founders of the Vietnam Veterans of San Diego, which then came to be known as the Veterans Village of San Diego. And now the Veterans Village of San Diego serves over 2,000 veterans and their families in San Diego County. He was a member of the Veterans of Foreign War, Chula Vista Post 2011, and he contributed his talents to many veterans organizations. I really got to know John about 15 years ago when I was a planning commissioner in the city of Chula Vista and then later a member of the city council. And he was part of the team that worked very hard to make sure that we got the veterans home in Chula Vista. John died really suddenly on Sunday morning, and it was really a shock to all of us. We'll miss him very much, and my sympathy goes out to his wife, Lenora, of 34 years, and his 2 children, Keith and Kimberly. We extend our sympathies and prayers to his family.
Thank you, Ms. Salas. Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I came back in 2004 from an overseas deployment, I wanted to get more involved, not in the active duty military side, but in the veterans community. And I was appointed to the San Diego County Veterans Advisory Council. As I showed up for my first meeting in Balboa Park in the Veterans Museum, the first person who met me at the door was John Smith. He said, "Are you a veteran?" I said, "Yes, Marine." He said, "Well, us Army guys won't hold that against you." He gave me a hug and he welcomed me, and you only had to meet John Smith one time to ensure that you would never forget him. He had that larger-than-life personality. He would hug you, he would welcome you, he would treat you in a very unique and special way. And I had the great opportunity for several years on that organization to sit next to John Smith at each of our meetings. I got to hear his stories about being a medic, as was pointed out. There's a special bond that exists between anybody that serves in combat. But there's an even higher threshold for the medic, because they are the person you call to when you're in need. They're often the last person that people talk to before they leave this earth. And John Smith took that same spirit and that same caring, and he brought it back with him. And a lot of people talk about caring for veterans, and a lot of people talk about doing the right thing. But John Smith came back wounded, and he continued every single day of his life to work for veterans. He founded the Vietnam Veterans Village of San Diego, which became the Veterans Village, to treat homeless veterans. For 23 years, he organized and was the announcer of the Veterans Parade. Every single day of his life, John Smith got up with one focus, and that was taking care of our returning veterans. John had a unique ability to treat every veteran exactly the same. As you watched him, whether he was talking to a general, 3- or 4-star general, a Medal of Honor winner, or whether he was talking to a homeless veteran who was down on his luck, he had the same reference and the same respect for everyone who had ever served. John is survived by his wife and 2 children, but he's also survived by thousands of veterans who see him as an example, as a model, as a mentor, as a friend. They don't make many like John Smith, and he will certainly be missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Ms. Saldana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, John Smith had a huge heart, and he gave so much to so many people for so long that it is just very tragic that in the end it was apparently a heart attack that ended his life. But when he came back, a wounded veteran, and saw the limited resources, Mr. Speaker, if I could please have attention on the floor. Members,
I'm going to ask that you please give your attention to the member speaking on the floor. And we will not resume until there's absolute respect and silence to the person presenting on the floor. Thank you. Ms. Saldana, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. John Smith had a tremendous impact on veterans throughout Southern California. He helped organize an annual Stand Down event. And I don't know how many of you had a chance to see this in action in your communities, but we would have hundreds, if not thousands of people, volunteers, doctors, dentists, attorneys, come in, set up an event for an entire weekend with the military-style tents on a school football field in San Diego, and invite people, veterans, and their family members in to get the support and services that they were not otherwise able to receive. And John Smith gave every ounce of his being to make sure that the men and women, many who were living on the streets, many veterans who have not received care, received the care that they so desperately needed. And he wasn't just an organizer, he wasn't just a fundraiser, he was out there himself, shaking hands, talking to the men and women who came in, making sure that they were treated with respect, with dignity, making sure that they had everything that they needed to get on with their lives, because he knew more than anyone how challenging it is to get on with your life when you've come back from a combat zone, when you've come back wounded in body and spirit. How do you get your life back on track? And I would see John not only at veterans events, but I would see him emceeing events for other community groups. He was always at the center of the action. He was always committed to raising funds for good organizations. And as I said, in the end, he gave so much of himself, he devoted so much of his life to other people, that it is such a tragedy that we have lost him now. So I'm very honored to rise to adjourn in his memory. He is one of those veterans who showed that you can not only overcome the challenges, but create incredible opportunities for others. So I'm very honored to stand and adjourn in the memory of John Smith.
Thank you, Ms. Saldana. At this time, we're going to return to file item 8HR 22. Garrick, clerk will read.
House Resolution 22 by Assemblymember Garrick relative to Ronald Reagan Day.
Mr. Garrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise today to present House Resolution 22, proclaiming February 6 this Saturday as Ronald Reagan Day in California. Ronald Reagan was born in Tampico, Illinois in 1911 and came to Hollywood, California in 1937 to pursue his acting career. Over the next 3 decades, he starred in 53 films and was the host of the General Electric Theater. During his time in the entertainment industry, he served as president of the Screen Actors Guild Union from 1947 through 1952, and again in 1959, leading the union through difficult times in the Hollywood blacklist era. In 1964, as a supporter of presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, Reagan delivered his landmark speech, Time for Choosing, effectively launching his own political career. Just 2 years later, in 1966, he was elected governor of our great state, a post which he held for 2 terms until 1975. After narrowly losing in 1976 the presidential nomination, he rebounded in 1980 with a landmark victory over President Jimmy Carter, receiving 489 of 538 electoral votes. He was re-elected in 1984 by an even wider margin with 49 of the 50 states. With these victories, Ronald Reagan became the first and only person to serve as both governor of the state of California and president of the United States. While president, Reagan was inaugurated in 1981. He inherited a delusioned nation, shackled by rampant inflation and high unemployment. Over the course of his presidency, he worked in a bipartisan manner to enact his bold agenda of restoring accountability and common sense to government, which led to an unprecedented economic expansion and created over 20 million new jobs for Americans. The positive impact that President Ronald Reagan had on America was paralleled only by the positive impact that he had on the rest of the world. His vision of peace through strength led to the end of the Cold War and the demise of the Soviet Union, guaranteeing basic human rights to millions of people across the globe. President Reagan would be celebrating this Saturday his 99th birthday, and it was with great pride, great respect, and great honor that I ask for an aye vote to proclaim this Saturday, February 6th, as Ronald Reagan Day and honor the memory of a great American and a great Californian. Mr. Speaker, I also would like to ask that the first roll be open for co-authors. Thank you.
Without objection. So members will first open the roll for, oh my apologies, Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker and members, I too rise in support of this resolution. I was around politically active, although not in the legislature, in the heydays of the Reagan administration, and I personally believe, and I mean this sincerely, that Reagan was probably one of the best governors that California has ever had. He oversaw the development of Medi-Cal and our welfare system. He established the Air Resources Board. He took a position against Taft-Hartley that prevented unions to strike and organize. He was the first president to invite an openly gay couple into the White House and proclaimed that gays should not be discriminated against. And he voted for the most liberal abortion statute of the day. I think that is the model that should guide Republicans in their efforts to become bipartisanship, because we accomplished much in California under Ronald Reagan, and I agree, he was not only one of the greatest governors, but I think one of the best presidents of the United States.
Thank you. Ms. Saldana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, along with Mr. Calderon, I do recognize that Ronald Reagan recognized a woman's right to choose. He established the Martin Luther King National Holiday. And in his term as both governor and as president, he recognized the need to increase revenues, even when the economy was in dire straits. He was pragmatic, he was a great communicator, and he recognized that tough choices require actions that may not go always along with what's popular, but in the end, he made choices that really did support the United States and the state of California, and he was rewarded with re-elections. So I stand to likewise honor someone who was a great leader and took very tough actions and made difficult choices when the circumstances demanded that. And I think that is why he really does deserve our ongoing respect and our admiration as someone who was a great political leader, but also someone who was very, in the end, understanding that you sometimes do need to do things that are difficult, but in the end serve the greater need.
Thank you. Mr. DeVore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of H.R. 22 and thank the distinguished colleague from San Diego, the Republican leader, for bringing it forward. I'm always struck when the few times that we've been able to honor President Reagan on the floor at the comments that are drawn from both sides of the aisle. And I think it's important in that context to look at history and to understand that President Reagan certainly began life as a committed Democrat. He was very active within the Screen Actors Guild. He was a supporter of President Franklin Roosevelt. And as time went on, he began to understand the threat of large government to our freedoms and liberties, and he began a lifelong journey. You see, President Reagan was a very intellectually curious individual. He read a lot, he wrote a lot, as we're now seeing with books that have come out about his diary and the speeches that he wrote himself, that in fact President Reagan was a very intelligent individual and very intellectually curious. And as time went on, he became more understanding of the fact that big government can squelch individual liberty and freedom. And if you look at his record as governor of the state of California and compare that to his record as president, you'll see a lot of differences. And those differences came out because he did keep reading. In fact, on economic policy, he was heavily influenced by Jude Wanniski and Dr. Art Laffer, and really embraced supply-side economics as he began to understand that when Senator Kennedy was elected president in 1960, he enacted a very sweeping tax reform that cut tax rates, that led to an enormous expansion of the American economy, unleashed the genius of the American entrepreneur. And he did the same with his tax cuts in 1981. which also ushered in an era of an unprecedented expansion of the U.S. economy and of our economic freedom and liberty. I heard a previous speaker fondly referring to his position in the state of California as being pro-choice, and in fact he was. But as he learned more about the issue and was preparing himself for the presidency, he came to a different conclusion on that issue and became very strongly pro-life as he began to understand that issue and had come to grapple with it. In fact, he was fond of telling a story that if you were driving on the side of the road and you saw a little, what appeared to be a baby on the side of the road, would you stop and would you pick it up and would you try to help that baby, or would you kick it? And of course, everybody knows what you would do. And so he would use that illustration to talk about the ethics, the morality of the issue that he had grappled with and had changed his mind on. So yes, let us honor President Reagan today. I am certainly honored myself to have been one of two members of this legislature who served as a Reagan White House appointee. I know my colleague, the distinguished Republican leader, worked in the Department of Energy. It was my honor to work in the Department of Defense for Caspar Weinberger.
1 minute, Mr.
And again, I appreciate the fact that H.R. 22 has been brought before this House and would respectfully urge your support of this measure.
Thank you. All debate having ceased, the clerk will open the roll for co-authors. Co-authors. Clerk will open the roll. Remember, this is for co-authors. Members, this is for co-authors. This is for co-authors, members. The roll is open for co-authors. Members, there are 57 co-authors, 58 co-authors. Clerk will close the roll. 58 co-authors have been added. Then on the resolution, all those in favor will have a voice vote on the resolution. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Resolution is adopted. Members, we move to file item 11, SB 205 by Hancock. Mrs. Brownlee will be taking this up. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 205 with amendments by Assemblymember Brownlee.
Ms. Brownlee. These are amendments, members.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SB 205 simply clarifies the state authority to distribute federal qualified school construction bond tax credits and to extend the time for federally allocated tax credits to be reallocated and clarifies the provisions for the charter school application process. I ask that the amendments be adopted and sent out to print and back on file.
Very well, members. We will have a voice vote on the amendments. All those in favor signify by the normal sound of aye. Any opposed? Amendments are adopted. Out to print and back on file. We'll now move to file item 12, SCR number 64 by Ms. Romero. Ms. Saldana will be taking this up. Clerk will read.
Senate concurrent resolution 64 by Senator Romero relative to American Heart Month and Wear Red Day.
Ms. Saldana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members, for so many of you wearing red today in honor of the Go Red for Women campaign, and February is American Heart Month to raise awareness and education about the risk of cardiovascular disease. SCR 64 declares February as American Heart Month. It recognizes the Go Red for Women, and more importantly, downstairs in room 125, we are doing assessments. So anyone in the building, and I encourage everyone to go downstairs, learn more about what you can do to prevent heart disease, and do a brief assessment of your own risk factors. This is part of a national call to increase awareness about heart and cardiovascular disease. Not only heart attacks, but hypertension, anything that has to do with the cardiovascular system. And it is a leading cause of death for women, something that is not widely understood. More women will die of cardiovascular disease than any of the other 5 leading causes of death for women, premature death. That's cancers, other types of illnesses. Cardiovascular disease is a very serious condition that, again, many times we fail to recognize the symptoms. Over 460,000 women will die this year That's nearly 500,000 women will die this year of cardiovascular disease. And right here in the Capitol, we have lost members of our own community to stroke. Last month, Melinda Melendez from Senator Romero's office died here in the Capitol building from hypertension, from a stroke. Will Smith, likewise, died of cardiovascular disease, a member of a staff. So we know that their lives were all about supporting people here in California, but we would also like the memory of their lives to inspire everyone to please take the time to understand your risk factors and take better care of yourself if you need to. We need everyone to be able to work on behalf of the people of California, and taking care of our hearts is part of that. I know that Assemblyman Torlakson had an incident recently. I see his mic is up, and he may want to talk about his own recent incident with heart disease. And here is somebody that I worked with on fitness, on other things that we would think that our health is very good, but again, take the time, do an assessment today. The people are here in the building to provide us with that opportunity. Just to put it in perspective, nearly 2,400 people die of cardiovascular disease every day. It's the leading cause of death, as I said before, for both not only women but also for men. And we need to learn the warning signs, the early indications that there is a problem with our cardiovascular system. And the Women's Caucus, this is something, you see a lot of women wearing red, and I want to invite, after we do our vote on this resolution, the women members to go to the rear of chambers. We have representatives with us today from the American Heart Association, and I'd like to do a photo to, again, raise the awareness and the knowledge among women about the importance of understanding heart disease. So I welcome other people's comments, and I'd like to open the roll call for co-authors. But please, members, today, think about your heart. Think about the people who work every day so hard in this building. Encourage them to take better care of themselves. And now I'll conclude my comments there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem Saldana. Mr. Torlakson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, glad to be here to speak in favor of this with a little extra meaning in my life about it than I've done in previous years. And first, thanks to all of you for your notes of concerns, text messages, calls, and stop-bys. And yes, I want to reinforce what Assemblymember Saldana said, that this is something that can affect everyone. My good seatmate and friend, Senator Calderon, Assemblymember Calderon, said, if it can happen to you, it can happen to anybody. In fact, Rod Wright said, I'm just going to go back to having Krispy Kreme's donuts wrapped in bacon, because if it can happen to you, why bother? But the point is, that it does matter, and to listen to the signs and to take care of yourself. And you know, I think I did everything right, but I had an incident. So I was running with Kevin, felt a tightening in my chest, thought it was cold air. I'd had a little cough and cold for a while. And, you know, machoed through it the last 20 minutes of the run, went back, got my tie on. I thought it was imperative that I make the Democratic caucus workshop. You know, it was going to be exciting and fun. And I was about to get in the car to go there, and I said, you know what, I'm going to go to the nurse because my chest is still sore. It was a sort of a tightening feeling. So I went to the nurse, and Claudia and Jennifer, they're angels, and I'm going to introduce them on the floor later in the month. But they checked things out and said, no, it's not your lungs, it's your heart. And next thing I knew, Ken Boskovitz is a CHP paramedic who's in this building all the time also to be there to help. And he was up and checked me out, and he said, you're going to the hospital. SAC fire paramedics got me there in no time at all, emergency room. And I had a stint. I won't show any scars because there are none. LBJ did that after his surgery, some of you might remember. But I don't have any scars because I just insert a catheter in your femoral artery, a couple of feet into your heart, check everything out, and everything was great except a couple of little clots in one artery, the left coronary artery. And next thing I know, I'm talking to the doctor during the procedure and asking him all kinds of questions, probably driving him nuts because I'm a biology teacher. And, you know, he said, I'm going to go in and vacuum that little clot out and then put a little stent in. So I want to thank the doctor. The Mercy General Hospital medical team is one of the best heart teams, heart intervention teams anywhere. Medtronic's Endeavor stent is in there fortifying the wall of the artery, also a company from Noreen Evans' district that has pioneered this great preventative device. But anyway, the point I wanted to make is not to belabor the personal side of it, is truly, we're all at potential risk. We lead stressful lives. We work hard. And so please find something good to do to exercise, 3-4 times a week, 30 to 40 minutes, walk, play tennis, swim, run, do something, gardening, whatever it is that will help you, and do watch what you eat, and listen to your heart, okay? Listen to your body. Let's stay hale and hearty and vote yes on this resolution and live it. Thank you.
Thank Mr. Swanson.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to add my voice to this wonderful resolution. All of us have our stories. My mom, in her 50s, had a chronic heart problem, and modern medicine kept her with us 16 additional years, and I thank the doctors for that. So it's really important for us to recognize that we are making advances, but we need to continue to do that and support the research and the importance of the science that will keep us alive and our loved ones. So I support this resolution.
Thank you. Ms. Saldana?
Well, thank you, Assemblyman Torlakson, for sharing something that's very recent. The technology obviously has improved, but the basic knowledge, the basic awareness is something we need to work on every day. So I encourage members to please join me as co-authors on this important resolution, and then, as I said, we'll adjourn to the rear to do a photo with representatives from the American Heart Association.
Very well. The clerk will open the roll for co-authors. The clerk will open the roll for co-authors. Members, this is for co-authors. Members, this is for co-authors. This is for co-authors, members. This is for co-authors, members. The clerk will close the roll and record 74 co-authors. 74 co-authors. We'll have a voice vote on the resolution. All those in favor signify by the normal sound of aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Resolution is adopted. Members, upon adjournment, we will have photos in the rear of the chamber. Seeing no further business before the House, the House stands adjourned. Mr. Portantino moves. Mr. Hagman seconds that the House stands adjourned to February 8th at 12 noon. All those in favor signify by the normal sign of aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Quorum call is lifted.
Thanks, sir. Good job today.
Members, please be advised that there is a Rules Committee hearing. There's a Rules Committee hearing in the Rules Room.